Hollywood sold the world a perfect legend, but behind Paul Newman's blue eyes was a secret so heavy it destroyed his own family. At 63, Paul Newman's daughter, Nell Newman, finally broke her silence in a CBS Sunday Morning interview, and what she revealed shattered one of Hollywood's most carefully guarded myths. Behind the flawless image of a devoted husband and father was a man living two lives, one for the public, and one for the love he could never acknowledge. The most painful truth came later. Paul Newman's will erased his family entirely. His fortune was left to a mysterious figure identified only by two initials, RR. Who was he, and why did Newman choose him over his wife and children? Westport, Connecticut looked like paradise from the outside. Iron gates, perfect lawns, Oscar portraits lining the walls. But inside the Newman estate, silence ruled. Nell learned young that there were questions you never asked, unless you wanted to lose your parents' affection. Her parents never held hands. Not once. Public embraces lasted exactly 1 second, like actors finishing a scene they no longer believed in. At home, Paul Newman was distant and cold. Joanne Woodward grew quiet the moment he entered a room, shrinking into herself. Nell remembered asking her mother once, while she washed dishes, "Are you sad?" Joanne pulled her hand away, not in anger, but in fear. She didn't know how to touch anyone when the truth hurt too much. Paul often vanished for days, sometimes weeks. When he returned, he barely spoke, retreating into his study. Late at night, Nell heard him laugh softly on long-distance calls. It was never her mother's voice. One winter night in 1972, Nell ran into her parents' bedroom after hearing glass shatter. Joanne was kneeling on the floor, clutching a broken wine glass, whispering, "You lied again." When Nell asked what her father had done, Joanne answered quietly, "Not all men love women, sweetheart." That sentence broke something inside her. Not long after, Nell found a Polaroid that slipped from her father's wallet. Paul smiling, arm wrapped around another man, looking at him with unmistakable tenderness. When she showed her mother, Joanne tore it apart and burned it. "We never talk about this. Never." From then on, Nell understood the rules. Don't ask where Dad goes. Don't ask why Mom takes sleeping pills. Don't ask why they sleep on separate floors. And above all, don't ask about love. The house filled with famous guests. Paul dressed differently around certain men, wore unfamiliar cologne, locked his bedroom door at night. Joanne went to bed early, pale, silent. They had perfect portraits, and hollow hearts. The first person who dared to challenge that silence was Scott Newman, Paul's eldest son. Scott asked the questions no one else would. Why didn't Dad touch Mom? Why didn't Dad say, "I love you"? Why were there always men who weren't just friends? In 1974, a classmate mocked Scott, asking if his father liked men or women. Scott broke the boy's nose. He was expelled. Paul didn't come to the school. He sent a lawyer, and a check. That night, Scott screamed at his father, "You didn't protect Mom. You didn't protect me. So who are you?" No one answered. Later, Nell found Scott's notebook. Inside were tear-stained words. "If he never loved Mom, then what am I? Was I born from love, or to protect a lie?" In 1978, Scott was found dead in his apartment. Pills. Wine. The TV playing Paul Newman accepting an award. The report said overdose. Nell knew better. Scott didn't die from pills. He died from silence. Years later, Nell discovered the truth she could no longer ignore. One night, she stopped outside her father's study and saw him writing a letter. The first line read, "Dear Red, the one who reminded me I was human." It wasn't friendship. It was love, hidden, buried, and protected at all costs. From that moment on, Nell understood, her parents' marriage wasn't love. It was a performance. Two legendary actors trapped in roles they could never leave. When Paul Newman died, the truth didn't come out in headlines. It surfaced quietly, in a will that erased his family and pointed to a love he never dared to name. When Paul Newman passed away, the final act confirmed what had long been hidden. His family was written out. His fortune redirected. Not toward fame. Not toward legacy. But toward a love he never lived openly. It began years earlier, on an ordinary afternoon that shattered a daughter's certainty forever. Nell Newman was on her way to drop off documents for her mother, fresh from an internship interview, her future glowing with promise. When the elevator doors opened, time froze. Her father, Paul Newman, stepped out of the corridor. Beside him wasn't Joanne Woodward. It was Gore Vidal. Not walking like a friend. Walking like a lover. Gore's fingers brushed Paul's wrist, slow, deliberate, before pulling away. Paul tilted his head and smiled, softly, intimately. They walked close enough that even a breeze could have touched their cheeks. Then Paul saw her. That look, Nell later said, followed me my entire life. It wasn't guilt. It was a silent plea. Please don't say anything. Gore smiled, calm and unbothered. Paul stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. And Nell was left alone, holding a secret she never asked for. After that night, Gore Vidal didn't disappear. He appeared more often. Joanne said nothing, but Nell noticed everything. The 2 a.m. calls, the long trips without contact, the handwritten notes by the phone. Call back. Once, Nell saw her father holding an old black and white photo. Paul and Gore sat by a lake, backs leaning together, eyes distant, like men who had gone further than friendship and never returned. She finally asked her mother, "Do you think Dad might be?" Joanne paused, then said quietly, "Not the man you thought." That silence was the confession. Gore Vidal never named Paul publicly. But in his 1995 memoir, he wrote, "There are men who will never belong to us. But every time they smile, we feel alive." He never wrote that way about anyone else. Years later, when Joanne's memory began to fail, one truth remained untouched. In moments of confusion, she whispered to Nell, "The way he looked at Gore, he never looked at me that way." Alzheimer's stole names, dates, and memories, but not betrayal. America remembered Joanne Woodward as Hollywood's symbol of loyalty and grace. An Oscar winner. The wife Paul Newman swore he'd never leave. Their marriage was legend. But now she sat alone in a nursing home, sunlight failing to warm the hands that had held Paul's heart for 50 years. And then one name kept resurfacing. Not Paul. Not the children. But Robert. At night, nurses heard Joanne speak clearly, describing cologne on Paul's shirt, unanswered calls from the Essex House Hotel, a blonde hair on a white pillow. And a name she said with sorrow. Robert. Nell remembered it instantly. At 17, she had once skipped school and seen her father step out of an elevator at the Essex House, laughing easily with Robert Redford. Too close. Too natural. She buried it. Until now. One day Joanne whispered, "That was the day he lied. Essex House. Room 1217. I called all night." Even as her mind faded, her heart remembered everything. When Paul Newman died on September 26, 2008, America mourned a legend. Tributes flooded television screens. Everyone believed in the perfect family behind the blue eyes. 3 days later, Nell received a call. The will had been activated. 6 weeks before his death, Paul Newman erased his wife and 6 children from his estate. Over $600 million, his company, image rights, royalties, transferred entirely to Newman's own foundation. Controlled by one man, Robert Forrester. Joanne received nothing. The children received nothing. And a no-contest clause ensured silence. Then came the appendix. A private fund once considered by Paul, called the Quiet Legacy. Its first beneficiary, R.R. The rumors ignited. A secret trip to Tuscany in 1982. No wives. No assistants. Just Paul and Redford. Joanne knew, a former friend admitted. She stayed silent, hoping that if Paul had his freedom, he might still come back. Instead, he left behind contracts instead of truth. Years later, evidence surfaced suggesting Paul may not have been mentally competent when he signed the final will. A handwritten letter to Joanne, never filed, told a different story. "Everything is yours. If something goes wrong, know I didn't choose it." That letter held no legal power. But it revealed the truth. When asked if she still wanted justice, Nell said quietly, "Some things can't be reclaimed with paperwork." What Paul Newman hid wasn't money. It wasn't fame. It was himself. A man celebrated for integrity, who lived a life of secrets. And when the curtain finally fell, all that remained wasn't anger, but unanswered love. In the end, the question isn't about Paul Newman. It's about us. Are we living as ourselves? Or leaving behind a silence our children will carry forever? This was just the beginning. Hit that subscribe button and buckle up. Digital Garage has so much more in store.